Aloha, everyone. I'm glad to stand here with Senator Gillibrand, who has been a leader in addressing the issue of sexual assault and sexual trauma in the military.
Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono is standing with a bipartisan group of federal lawmakers and advocates in support of the Military Justice Improvement Act.
The chain of command in the military is pretty much deemed sacrosanct. And because of that, we have basically in the military institutionalized a process that protects the assaulters. Because you have to go often to the very people, sometimes the perpetrators of these assaults themselves, or definitely a chain of command not sympathetic to disrupting the lives of people who have served in the military for a long time. So we have institutionalized and protected a process that does not result in justice for the victims. And if this were the case in the civilian context, do you think any of us would consider that fair? Do you think any of us would stand for it? And yet, on the military side, this has been going on for years and years and years. And this is why, in spite of the fact that certain improvements were made to the Code of Military Justice, that we stand here today with even more recent stories that show us that the changes that we sought 4 years ago have not occurred, and certainly not to the degree that we would want them to occur.
The bill would establish an impartial, fair, and accountable military justice system to address the crisis of sexual assault.
I would say the experience of a soldier or someone who has an otherwise good record is dragged in as a way to ameliorate the horror of the crimes committed. So it is about time that we take these decisions out of the hands of people who are in an inherent conflict and moving these cases forward and putting them in the hands of professional JAG officers. So I stand here with you and with all of you. Mahalo.
All rise.
The legislation, if passed, would put the decision to prosecute serious crimes like sexual assault into the hands of impartial military prosecutors instead of potentially biased military commanders.
Yet the military continues to fail at solving this very simple problem. Instead, we continue to have no accountability.
New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is reintroducing the legislation.
Even 4 years after the problem of sexual assault in the military was forced out of the shadows by survivors, and after renewed pledges by the military brass of "we got this," the system remains broken. The problem hasn't gone away, and military sexual assault is as pervasive as ever.
During a Thursday press conference, Gillibrand introduced Adrienne Perry, whose family has been directly impacted by the military's current system.
Since then, we have moved 7 times to include Hawaii, Okinawa, Japan, and 3 different tours at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We have been through many deployments together, 3 of which were combat tours to Afghanistan. Throughout our 16 years of marriage, I have proudly stood by my husband's side as a Marine spouse. Our 3 children have been raised in the Marine Corps way of life, and up until the sexual abuse that my daughter suffered, we have always enjoyed the adventures and experiences we've shared as a military family. Presently, my husband is a major in the United States Marine Corps, serving as the executive officer for 2-6 at Camp Lejeune. In 2013, my husband received orders to Japan, where we spent 3 years. During this time, he served under 3 different officers in charge, one of them being Colonel Wilson. Colonel Wilson was a full-bird colonel, meaning he was a very high-ranking officer who was 1 rank shy of becoming a general. Towards the end of our tour in Okinawa, Wilson was assigned a very prestigious job in Australia, where he was going to be represented the United States Marine Corps on a 6-month training exercise between the Australian Defence Force and the Marine Corps. Not even 2 weeks after Wilson took command, he was abruptly relieved of his position as the senior officer in charge of this exercise with the Australian Defence Force. My husband was not given the details as to why he was relieved. Shortly after Wilson was relieved of his position in Australia, he was quietly reassigned to a position of extreme increased responsibility and influence at Camp Lejeune Marine Corps Base in North Carolina as the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force G3 Operations Officer. With this new, highly respected position, his responsibilities continued to increase, and his position became even more prestigious. The Camp Lejeune Command was completely unaware that Wilson had been relieved from this position in Australia prior to his arrival to Lejeune. In May of 2016, our family was given orders to move from Okinawa, Japan, to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Wilson reached out to my husband upon our arrival to Camp Lejeune since he was already settled into base housing. Wilson and his wife were very kind and gracious, inviting us over to their home on multiple occasions. A couple of weeks after we began spending time at the Wilsons' home, one of my daughters, whom was 6 years old at the time, disclosed to me that Wilson had sexually abused her. Her twin sister eventually shared something he did to her as well. Immediately, we notified the military police, and the military police alerted Naval Crime Scene Investigative Service, also known as NCIS. My husband and I gave NCIS as much information as we possibly could about Wilson. We told them about how Wilson was relieved from his position in Australia. We recommended they look into his removal and find out why. NCIS then siphoned all electronic data from our phones for evidence, which we did authorize. The second MEF, the 2 MEF command, which was Wilson's command, authorized a military protective order stating Wilson could not be within 500 feet of our family. Other than the protective order, there were no additional restrictions placed upon Wilson. He was not confined to the military jail like we had hoped and asked. Instead, he was allowed to live freely on base, which was less than a mile away from our home. We felt the protective order was not being taken seriously. We made repeated attempts to meet with authorities regarding our concerns. We pleaded that the order be enforced in multiple meetings. I should not have to fight to have a protective order enforced properly for my children. As months passed by, our case just seemed to sit stagnant. Legal responsibilities were shifted around between several people, causing us to have inconsistencies on who was working our case. I could not understand how this case was going to go to trial with any hope of seeing justice served for our family, considering no one was speaking to my husband or myself. We were assigned a victim's legal counsel who was a knowledgeable lawyer and a good-hearted Marine officer, but lacked the experience. And quite frankly, he was fighting outside his weight class on this case. My husband and I kept making phone calls and explaining our discontent with the lack of communication. It was not until our godson, Lieutenant Colonel John Stevens, was assigned to our case in November, 4 months after we reported what Wilson had done, that we were actually able to start piecing the puzzle together. I took it upon myself to seek out civilian victims legal counsel through Arnold and Porter, Kay Scholler, whom works with Protect Our Defenders. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens, his trial team, a new military VLC that was assigned to our case, and our civilian VLCs were welcomed assets to us. Less than 6 months after Wilson sexually abused my daughter on multiple occasions, he sexually assaulted an adult female. She courageously came forward and reported what he had done to her. It was only after she came forward that the command finally decided Wilson needed to be sent to the military jail while he awaited trial for all charges against him. We thought NCIS would surely seize his devices after one more horrible allegation. However, we were wrong. To this day, Wilson's cell phone and computer, his personal devices, were never ever seized. Our case went to trial in August. It was then that the reasons for his removal from Australia finally came to surface, over a year after he was relieved. Wilson was relieved from his position in Australia because of serious misconduct, some of which was sexual in nature. Wilson's misconduct was never addressed. Instead, he was given a dream job at Camp Lejeune. The details of his behavior described at the trial warranted serious consequences that would never have allowed him to have the job he was given at Camp Lejeune. If you hear anything I have to say at all today, please let it be this. If the United States Marine Corps, Okinawa Command, had properly punished Wilson over a year and a half ago for his misconduct in Australia, he would never have been able to harm my daughters. Their failure to punish him to punish him cost one of my daughters her innocence. And to me, that's unforgivable. The system as we know it today is slanted. It is a system where it's set up to retrieve evidence from the victim with little motivation to obtain any evidence from the accused. For example, Wilson's personal electronic devices. Another huge concern is command bias. In the military, if you are accused of a crime, the commander has the authority to decide whether or not the crime and evidence presented is worthy of going to trial. These commanders are being given legal authority when they have zero education regarding legal matters. These are a few of the reasons why so many of these cases never see a courtroom. We are fortunate in that our case did go to trial. I desperately fought our way to justice being somewhat served for our family. Had I not been such a loud and persistent voice for my daughters, this case would never have made it to a general court-martial. No parent should ever have to fight the way my husband and I had to fight in order to get our case to trial. As I sat in the courtroom on sentencing day, I could not believe what I was witnessing. The judge looked at the jury, who consisted of generals and colonels. Not one of them was a female. And he told them to take into account Wilson's prior military service to our country when they go to sentence him. The judge then read off a very long, glorifying, and detailed bio of every single leadership position Wilson held, every medal he ever received, and every combat deployment he was ever a part of. If a person worked for Apple for 30 plus years and was convicted of sexual assault, would the judge in civilian courts look the jury in the eye and tell them to take into account all the great things this individual did for Apple when they go to sentence him? No. Although I am angry about the amount of time Wilson was given, I realize, after speaking with several survivors, that the majority of survivors get no justice whatsoever. This should not be the case, and it's shameful to say the least. I also cannot help but to think about how different our case could have turned out if my husband had been a young enlisted Marine rather than a major. I believe with all my heart, if my husband were a young enlisted Marine, this case would have never, ever made it to a general court-martial. Currently, I am trying to be a voice and shine a light on how these cases are handled in the military. I am hopeful that my being here today and sharing our story will help everyone understand that change within the current military justice system must be made in order to properly serve survivors of sexual assault within the military. Approving the Military Justice Improvement Act is the first vital step necessary in order to afford sexual assault survivors the opportunity to see justice served for the abuse they have endured. I stand before you today and ask that you please consider supporting this act. How many more survivors have to be denied justice due to a seriously flawed system before change will be made? I hope the stories you hear today are the last ones you need to hear in order to support Senator Gillibrand's Military Justice Improvement Act. If the Military Justice Improvement Act had already been a law, I would not be standing here in front of you today, and I believe that my daughter could have been spared her innocence. Thank you so much.
On Friday, the Department of Defense released information about the number of sexual assault reports made at installations around the world for fiscal years 2013 through 2016. For the U.S. Army Garrison Hawaii, the document shows 0 reports in fiscal year 2016, 2015, or 2014, down from 12 reported in 2013. It's important to note that the number of reports listed for an installation does not necessarily mean that the alleged incident occurred there, since service members can report allegations of sexual assault at any time and at any place. Since 2012, the department's annual reports on sexual assault in the military have reported regular declines in the prevalence rates of sexual assault among the force. But according to Senator Gillibrand, not all the news is good.
Listen to just the headlines of the last few months. From March, quote, reports of sexual assault increase at 2 military academies. From September, quote, bad Santa. Navy's top admiral kept spokesman after boozy party sexual predator warning. From October, in the military, trusted officers have become alleged assailants in sex crimes. From just a few weeks ago, quote, senior military officials sanctioned for more than 500 cases of serious misconduct. Enough is enough. The number that keep coming out of the Pentagon, the stories and patterns that we see when analyzing sexual assault case files in the military, the scandals where senior members of the military are preying on people who are supposed to be able to trust them, it all continues. All of this should shock and appall every single member of Congress.
According to Gillibrand's further review of the numbers, the Department of Defense estimated that there were nearly 15,000 sexual assaults against service members in fiscal year 2016. 7 out of 10 service members did not report their assault in an unrestricted or actionable manner to their chain of command, which the senator says shows a severe lack of confidence in the current system. Of those 30% who were brave enough to make an unrestricted report, approximately 60% of them told the Department of Defense that they had experienced some form of retaliation for reporting. More than 70% of cases considered for court-martial were never even referred to court-martial proceedings. And just 9% of cases ended in conviction.
We're seeing a high number of civilian victims as well as military victims, a low prosecution rate of sexual assault cases, and no improvement in the rate of retaliation against those who are brave enough to come forward. This shows that there is still not good order and discipline in our military, and it shows that our system is broken because it protects predators. It fails to protect victims. And most of all, it shows that commanders still aren't able to police themselves and hold predators accountable, despite all their claims to the contrary. I urge my colleagues in the Senate to support this bipartisan bill, the Military Justice Improvement Act, which already has the support of senators from across the aisle, including the one standing here with me. How much longer do service members have to wait before we finally do the right thing? How many more years after putting the military on a clock to solve this problem will Congress no longer accept the status quo? How much longer do men and women who so bravely fight for our country have to wait for a military justice system that is worthy of their sacrifice? According to the recent survey by the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of Americans, only 19% of women and 33% of men think that the Defense Department is effectively handling sexual assault. 71% of women and 64% of men who reported sexual assault suffered retaliation after reporting. And 46% of women said it was more likely they would report if prosecutors, not commanders, got to make the decision about whether or not to move forward. This is what the numbers say. We need to take the prosecution of military sexual assault and other violent felonies out of the chain of command now, put it in the hands of independent military prosecutors who know what they're doing, who are trained to prosecute these crimes. Military officers don't have the legal training that they need to make such difficult decisions that in the civilian world would be handled by district attorneys with years of experience. Our commanders have a tough enough job already. We should let trained, experienced prosecutors take this burden off their hands. But the only way we can make this change is if we pass our bill. There should be no more excuses. Listen to the stories. Listen to Adrienne Perry. That story of her daughters is heartbreaking. Listen to what her family experienced after reporting that her children were sexually assaulted by a high-ranking military officer who should have never been in that position in the first place. Listen to what really is likely to happen in the military and why justice is not possible. This system is broken, and if Congress doesn't fix it, then it means that Congress is part of the problem. So I urge everyone here with me and who is listening, please speak out about this. Raise your voice. Tell your story. Let's do everything we can to pass this bill. We need access to a justice system that is independent, well-trained, professional, and fair.
Protect Our Defenders is an organization devoted solely to helping survivors of sexual assault and to bring change. And we stand so proudly with Senator Gillibrand and the other senators who are here today in support of Military Justice Improvement Act. There's basically two things I want to say very quickly. The military is failing. You've heard that over and over, and Adrienne's proof of that. Last year, there were 4,600 unrestricted reports of sexual assault in the military. 4,600 women and men came forward and said, I have been sexually assaulted or raped. Those 4,600 sexual assaults resulted in 389 courts-martial, less than 10%. That resulted in 124 convictions of a sex offense. 98% of the reports did not result in a conviction. That means 98% of those people are still in the military, still serving, still out there as a threat to our military's ability to function. The second thing I want to talk about is something that Adrienne said. The person that was a knight in shining armor to her was a prosecutor. I'm damn proud to be a prosecutor, or was when I was a prosecutor. Every day I fought hard for victims. A commander's job is not to fight hard for victims in a courtroom. Empower the prosecutors, empower Adrienne's hero to be making these decisions, and you will get justice, and you will get results that make sure that there are not more Adriennes out there. And very importantly, I want to say both of her children are victims. I don't care what the verdict was. Colonel Wilson assaulted both of her children, and we have to stop this. And thank you, Senator Gillibrand.
Sexual assault and harassment awareness is at a fever pitch across the United States as new claims are impacting every institution.
Sexual assault, sexual groping, sexual violence, sexual harassment are never okay. They are never okay, no matter where they occur, whether in the military or the boardroom or any other forum.
The simple fact of the matter is that it is wrong for any person to use his or her power to force or to try to achieve sexual gratification from another person who doesn't consent. And that's just wrong. And we are seeing it and have seen it, and in the last 6 months have seen it way too often. And I want to thank everybody for speaking up. We saw it first in the entertainment industry. As an aside, I don't know how they have time to make movies in Hollywood. I mean, it's just breathtaking. But it's not limited to the entertainment world. We know it exists in business, and we know it exists in government, and we know it exists in military. Now, the vast majority of men and women who serve this country bravely and honorably do not participate in this sort of misbehavior. But some do. And they've got to be called out. And this bill does that. And it will make our military and our country stronger for it, in my judgment.
As perpetrators from Hollywood, Congress, and across multiple industries begin to face the consequences of their crimes, Swan believes that our military women and men who have been preyed upon also deserve a #MeToo reckoning moment. This means not only bringing the perpetrators of military sexual violence to justice, but also a holding to account of those commanders who have compounded the crime by refusing to hold these predators accountable, as is their duty.
Social media has helped to propel the movement, as was noted by Kathleen McGilvery, CEO of YWCA Hawaii Island, during the October 28th Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event held in Hilo.
It's October 28th, and we do this every October. It's our 9th Walk a Mile in Our Shoes, and we are so pleased to have a beautiful day, a beautiful weather. So part of it is about being a walker, to raise awareness of sexual assault, supporting our survivors. It's not like when you have a car accident, people are always there to say, oh, are you all right? And they're acting concerned, and that is very supportive and healing. But with sex assault, it's a crime that has a lot of shame involved. And it's not the shame of the victim, it's the shame for the perpetrator. But the victims feel it, and the victims aren't always able to stand up and say, this is something that happened to me. So we really want to walk in support of them and let them know that this is not their fault. This did happen, and it is not something that had anything to do with them. It's the shame of the perpetrator. Then the other thing that we're doing is we're raising money. This program is completely free for all of our survivors, and our sex assault services program does counseling, information in the schools, and prevention education for students. We also use the program monies for transporting victims. We do SANE nursing exams for people if they've just been assaulted. And if you're wondering where the money goes, it all stays right here on Hawaii Island. Hawaii Island, we have about 230 new cases every year. We have about 1,000 people we help through phone support, and we also have about 50 SANE exams a year. That's about one a week. We'll do a sexual assault forensic nursing exam to gather evidence. So those are the kinds of programs that this supports, and this is a fun event to bring some awareness and some funds to that, and we just appreciate the heck out of the community for showing up.
We pray that you might help us keep our balance, for on this march we are hoping that we might assist folks who really need your help in keeping and finding a new balance. As we find our feet suffering unaccustomed wear, we ask for healing for those scrapes and bruises, but we also ask for your healing for those who are damaged much more deeply than we will be today. And we pray that you might magnify our witness this day, that sexual assault and gender-based violence should end. Indeed, the last one should have been yesterday or even the day before, and that tomorrow we might wake to a day of healing with no new injuries to suffer. Amen.
Are we ready for the untying of the leg? Here we go.
We hope yesterday, as Eric Anderson said when he was doing the blessing, we hope that yesterday was the last sexual assault, and tomorrow we're just praying for more strength.
The event comes at a time of heightened awareness concerning sexual assault and sexual harassment, as women, many of them celebrities, are coming forward detailing the experiences they have long kept hidden. In a show of support, a staggering number of people have posted the #MeToo hashtag over social media, illustrating the widespread problem in a new way. It feels like a watershed moment.
So this is very timely, talking about sex assault in the public and in our community. The Me Too campaign has just exploded. And it's not that it hasn't been happening, that sex assault hasn't been happening and sexual harassment hasn't been happening, but I think that people are standing up and saying, this happened to me too. And it's giving visibility and awareness for those that feel the strength to say that this has happened. I've seen hundreds of posts from friends. Sex assault happens at least to 1 in 4 women. But then even sexual harassment has happened to almost every single woman I know. I can't think of an exception, actually. And so this is a great way to raise awareness and another way to say, you're not alone.